I don't know why you even bother asking. You're not much of a wife anyway. That one line hit harder than the kitchen clock's steady tick. It was nearly 7:30 in the evening, the cheap overhead light buzzing like a dying insect, shadows stretching long across the scuffed linoleum floor. My husband didn't even look at me as he said it. He kept his eyes on the folded newspaper in his hands, as if my request for $12,000 had been nothing more than background noise. What would you do if your own family called you useless, then begged for your help? Don't miss a single second of this story. I remember the smell of overcooked meatloaf drifting through the room, heavy and greasy, mingling with the faint sourness of spilled beer drying on the edge of the counter. My mother sat at the table, lips pressed tight, hands folded neatly in her lap as though silence could make her holy. My father coughed once, a harsh scrape in his throat, and muttered, "She does ask for too much." The words stung, but I kept my face calm. I had learned that from years of survival. Never show them the wound, only the scar. My brother leaned against the doorframe, phone glowing in his hand, smirk tugging at his lips. He didn't say anything, not yet, but his silence was its own weapon. I folded my hands on the table, pressing my palms flat against the cool wood, grounding myself. "I'm not asking for diamonds," I said evenly. My voice didn't shake, though inside I could feel my pulse hammering. "I'm asking for 12,000. For bills. For repairs. For things that actually keep this house standing." My husband flipped a page of the paper with a dry rustle. "You always have some excuse. Always." The word curled like smoke around the room. I glanced toward the window. Outside, the street lamp flickered, casting the yard in uneven patches of light. The neighbor's dog barked twice, then went silent. The world felt too still, as if even the night held its breath, waiting for me to break. Instead, I took a long, slow breath and let it out through my nose. That calmness unsettled them more than if I had cried. My brother finally looked up from his phone. 12 grand? You act like it grows on trees." His tone was mocking, yet he said it with the ease of someone who had never gone without. I wanted to laugh. He had drained accounts bigger than 12,000 in one weekend, yet here he was shaking his head at me. My mother's eyes slid toward him, soft, forgiving. Toward me, her gaze hardened like stone. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet, ordinary, and sharp in its cruelty. A fork against a chipped plate. The hum of the fridge. The way their eyes passed over me like I was invisible except when it came time to blame. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't let the tears come. Instead, I reached for the glass of water in front of me, the rim cool against my fingers. I took a sip, slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. And in that pause I made a choice. I would not beg them again. "Maybe you should learn to live without so much," my father said, his voice carrying the finality of a gavel. The air in the room grew heavier. My husband folded his newspaper and stood, dropping it onto the counter with a hollow slap. "Conversation's over." He walked out, footsteps fading down the hallway, the sound of the TV crackling to life in the other room. That was it. That was their answer. I stayed seated, the chair creaking under me as though it too wanted me gone. My brother chuckled, scrolling his phone again, and muttered under his breath, "Not much of a wife." The clock ticked. Tick, tick. Each second marking my humiliation. But under the table my hand brushed against my purse. Inside, tucked between the lining and a folded scarf, was an envelope. Thin, ordinary, unremarkable to anyone else. But to me it was the beginning of something they could not yet see. I didn't pull it out. I didn't even look at it. But knowing it was there calmed me. I had an advantage, one they would never imagine. My mother finally broke the silence. "You should stop embarrassing yourself. He's right, you know. A good wife wouldn't need to ask." I smiled then. Not wide. Not happy. Just a small, sharp curve of the lips that made her frown deepen. "A good wife," I repeated softly, "knows when to stop asking." Her eyes narrowed, searching my face for cracks, for weakness. She found none. I excused myself from the table, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound echoing too loud in the cramped kitchen. I walked down the hallway, past the living room where my husband sat with his beer and his television, past the faded family photos lining the wall. Every frame seemed to watch me, frozen smiles from years when I thought family meant safety. But I kept walking, my footsteps steady, my heart oddly calm. In my bedroom, I shut the door quietly and sat on the edge of the bed. The envelope was in my hands now. I slid it out from the purse and ran my fingers along its edges, feeling the ridges of what was inside. Papers. Receipts. Things I had kept for years when no one else cared to notice. I thought of the look on my brother's face, smug and untouchable. I thought of my parents' judgment, quick and cruel. I thought of my husband's dismissal, so casual it stung more than if he had shouted. The word useless repeated in my head like a bell tolling. But with each repetition it lost its power. Because I knew something they didn't. Useless women don't keep records. Useless women don't collect proof. Useless women don't bide their time. The night stretched long, the hum of the fridge drifting faintly down the hall, the flicker of the TV under the door. I sat there, envelope in hand, and whispered to the quiet room, "We'll see who's useless." I didn't know how long I sat like that, but at some point the house fell silent. Doors clicked shut. Snoring drifted through the walls. The clock in the living room ticked steadily toward midnight. I opened the envelope just enough to see the first page, the handwriting I knew too well, the numbers scribbled in margins. I smiled again, faint but certain, and slid it back inside. The next morning they would look at me the same way, call me the same names. They would laugh and shrug and dismiss. But I would not be the same. Because while they believed they had silenced me, I had already started writing the first line of their downfall. The very next morning my brother strolled into the kitchen like he owned the place. He wasn't even supposed to be there, he'd spent the night at his lawyer's house, but now he came swaggering in, dressed sharp in a pressed shirt, hair slicked back, grinning as if the world bent for him. My mother practically ran to the stove, piling eggs onto his plate before he sat down. "Eat, darling, you need your strength today," she fussed, her voice full of warmth I hadn't heard directed at me in years. I sat at the far end of the table, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, steam curling against my face. My father read the newspaper, glasses low on his nose, but even he couldn't hide the pride shining through when he glanced at his son. The bail hearing was in a few hours. 12,000 for me had been too much. But 600,000 for him? They'd written the check before he even asked. I sipped my coffee slowly, the bitter taste sharp on my tongue. My husband walked in behind him, clapping him on the shoulder. "Big day, huh? Don't worry, you'll walk right through it. Nothing sticks to you." They laughed together, the sound grating against the quiet thud of my pulse. I looked down at the table, tracing a crack in the wood with my finger. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. By mid-morning we were in the courthouse. The building smelled faintly of dust and coffee, polished floors reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. Reporters stood clustered near the entrance, murmuring, their pens ready. Cameras flashed as my brother strutted past them, adjusting his tie like he was about to deliver a speech. I stayed behind, half a step back, watching. Always watching. Inside the courtroom the air was tense, but not for him. He leaned casually against the defense table, whispering jokes to his lawyer. When the judge read out the charges, embezzlement, fraud, misappropriation of funds, his smirk didn't fade. "Your Honor," the lawyer said smoothly, "my client has strong ties to this community. He's no flight risk. He's ready to cooperate." And just like that, bail was set. $600,000. Paid on the spot, with money that came from the same hands that had denied me 12,000. The papers went wild outside, scribbling notes, snapping photos. "Local businessman granted bail," the headlines would say, "not criminal son walks free." I could almost see the words forming before ink even touched paper. When we stepped out, the sun was glaring hot against my skin, but my brother soaked it in like a spotlight. He shook hands with his lawyer, then slapped my father on the back. "Told you I'd be fine." My mother's eyes shone with pride. She hugged him, kissed his cheek, and whispered something I couldn't hear. But I didn't need to. I knew the tone. It was the voice reserved only for him. The chosen one. We drove home in silence, except for him humming tunelessly in the back seat. My father's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, not from shame but from relief. They thought the worst was over. That evening the house buzzed with energy. My mother cooked enough food to feed 20, piling dishes high with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, biscuits. The smell was rich, buttery, almost suffocating. My husband poured drinks for the men, clinking glasses, raising toasts. "To second chances," he said. I stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes that weren't mine, water scalding my hands until the skin turned red. Their laughter carried through the walls, loud and careless. Every word felt like a slap. When I finally stepped back into the living room, my brother was holding court, telling stories about how the judge respected him, how the lawyer said he'd never seen a case this weak. Everyone listened. My parents nodded along, their eyes glowing with pride. Nobody looked at me. I slipped my purse onto my lap, fingers brushing against the hidden folder. The edges of the papers inside pressed against my palm sharp as teeth. I didn't open it, not here, not now, but I felt its weight. It reminded me I wasn't powerless no matter how loudly they ignored me. Later that night, when the house settled into drunken murmurs and clinking glasses, I excused myself. My brother barely noticed. My mother waved me off without a glance. In my room, I opened the folder fully for the first time in weeks. Inside were scraps they'd long forgotten. Old bank slips, notes he'd tossed carelessly into the trash that I had retrieved, signatures that didn't match. They weren't much on their own, but together? They whispered a different story. I spread them across the bed, the lamp casting a yellow glow over the papers. My fingers traced the ink, the dates, the names. Threads began to form in my mind like a puzzle slowly fitting together. He thought he was untouchable. My parents thought he was golden. But these papers said otherwise. I started writing in a small notebook I kept hidden under my pillow. One name. One date. One account number at a time. Each entry felt like a stitch sewing together a net he wouldn't see until it closed around him. The house was loud downstairs, laughter echoing against the walls, but in my room the silence was sharp. My pen scratched steadily, my breath even. For the first time that day I felt steady, almost calm. Around midnight I heard footsteps in the hall. My brother's voice, low, urgent, speaking into his phone. "No, I told you I handled it. Nobody's gonna find out. Just keep quiet. I'll fix it." I froze, pen still in my hand, heart thudding. His tone wasn't smug now. It was tight, defensive. I leaned closer to the door, listening. "Don't call me again tonight. We'll meet tomorrow." The floor creaked as he walked away. I stayed still until the silence returned, then exhaled slowly. So, the cracks were showing. The golden boy's shine was fading, even if they couldn't see it yet. I turned back to the papers, the folder still open on the bed. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from certainty. The day would come when their pride would turn to shame, when their laughter would choke in their throats. I closed the folder, slid it back into my purse and whispered to the empty room, "Your second chance won't save you." The words left my lips in a whisper meant only for the shadows of my room. I tucked the folder back into my purse and set it gently on the nightstand. The house below had grown quiet at last, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant buzz of the streetlight outside slipping through the silence. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, but my mind wouldn't rest. Every word my brother had hissed into that phone still echoed in my ears. The next morning I went through the motions of routine. The coffee pot gurgled, the smell of burnt toast filled the kitchen, and sunlight spilled weakly through the blinds. My parents sat across from each other, their conversation hushed. My brother hadn't come down yet. My mother stirred her tea slowly, eyes fixed on the swirls, while my father rattled the paper but never really read it. I kept my head down, buttering my toast. My brother's voice from the night before replayed in my head, tight, defensive, not the smooth arrogance he showed everyone else. Something was unraveling and I needed to catch every loose thread. By afternoon I found myself in town carrying a basket for groceries. I didn't need much, but it gave me reason to linger. The grocery store smelled of citrus and detergent, cool air brushing against my skin as I walked the aisles. Familiar faces passed by, neighbors, church women, the mailman. All of them offered polite nods, a smile, then whispers as soon as they thought I couldn't hear. "He's out already?" one woman murmured to another, their heads close over the apples. 600,000 bail, the other whispered back. Family must have paid. I kept walking, pretending to scan labels though my ears burned. Their voices were low, but in a small town, whispers had a way of traveling faster than storms. And those whispers weren't about me anymore. They were about him. When I reached the checkout, Mrs. Givens leaned forward, her voice kind but curious. "I suppose it's good to see your brother home safe." Her words were polite enough, but her eyes searched my face, looking for cracks. I smiled faintly, slid cash across the counter and said nothing. Sometimes silence was sharper than words. At home I carried the groceries in, placing each item on the counter carefully, deliberately. My brother was in the living room, phone pressed to his ear again, voice low and harsh. He turned his back when he saw me, but I caught fragments. No, not yet. Keep it quiet. I'll handle it. Handle what? I placed the bread into the pantry, the eggs into the fridge, and listened. His voice grew sharper. I said, don't call me here. The front door creaked as he stepped onto the porch to finish his call. I dried my hands on a towel and slipped into my room. From my purse I pulled out the notebook I had started. The pages filled slowly with names, numbers, scraps of overheard conversations. I wrote quickly, scribbling down the time of his call, the phrases I'd caught. The pieces weren't clear yet, but I could feel them edging closer to something bigger. That evening, while dinner cooked, I noticed my mother watching me. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering for the briefest second. She ladled stew into bowls, her movements brisk. You've been quiet lately, she said, voice too casual. I've had things on my mind, I replied. Don't go digging where you don't belong, she warned softly as if reading my thoughts. I met her gaze. And where exactly do I belong? She looked away, the wooden spoon clattering against the pot. No answer came. Later that night I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of cut grass and wood smoke. Crickets sang in the yard, their rhythm steady, almost calming. Across the street, porch lights glowed, shadows moving behind curtains. Neighbors watching. Always watching. That's when I heard it, the sound of my brother's car starting. Headlights cut through the dark as he pulled away, tires crunching on gravel. Curiosity pressed heavy on my chest. I slipped on my sweater, grabbed my keys, and followed at a distance. My old sedan rattled against the road, headlights dim, but far enough behind that he wouldn't notice. He drove toward the edge of town, past shuttered shops and the faded gas station, until he pulled into a small parking lot behind an old bar. I parked down the street, engine off, watching from the shadows. He got out quickly, phone in hand, and met a man near the dumpsters. Their voices carried faintly in the still night air. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Money, keepers, can't risk it. The man shoved an envelope into his hand. My brother glanced around nervously, then tucked it into his jacket. My stomach tightened. This wasn't arrogance anymore. This was fear. I ducked lower in my seat as he walked back to his car, his face pale in the glow of the bar's neon sign. He sped off, leaving me staring at the empty lot, the image of that envelope burning in my mind. Back at home, I slipped inside quietly, careful not to wake anyone. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding, and wrote everything down. The bar. The man. The envelope. Every detail mattered. I stared at the page long after I'd closed the notebook. The whispers in town, the overheard calls, the late-night meetings. It was all stacking up. His golden boy shine was cracking, piece by piece. And though my parents clung to their pride, I could hear it in the silence of the house, feel it in the stiffness of their shoulders. Even they had started to wonder. I turned off the lamp, lay back in bed, and let the dark surround me. The quiet wasn't comforting anymore. It was alive, full of secrets waiting to be dragged into the light. And I promised myself, I would be the one to drag them. The very next morning, the promise stirred awake before I did. The house was oddly still but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that waits for a storm. I stepped into the kitchen and found my father sitting at the table, a white envelope gripped tight in his trembling hands. My mother stood nearby, her face pale, lips moving without sound. The seal was already broken. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching. My father finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Subpoena, he muttered. The word seemed foreign in his mouth, as if he'd never imagined it could touch our family. My mother reached for the envelope as if to hide it, but her hands shook so badly that the papers slipped to the floor. I bent down slowly, deliberately, and picked them up. Court dates. Requests for records. Names listed one after another. The pages smelled faintly of ink and metal, like every government office I had ever sat in. He promised us it was handled, my mother whispered. Promises don't keep the law away, I said softly. From down the hall came the slam of a door. My brother's footsteps pounded against the wood floors before he appeared, shirt half buttoned, tie dangling from his neck. He snatched the papers from my hand, his eyes darting across the words, jaw tightening. This is nothing, he snapped. Just routine. But his voice cracked, and that was all I needed to hear. By afternoon, 2 unmarked cars rolled into the driveway. Neighbors peeked from porches, curtains shifting like nervous eyes. The agents wore plain suits, their shoes shining against the gravel. They knocked firmly, no hesitation. My father tried to greet them with dignity, shoulders back, voice steady, but I saw the sweat gathering at his temples. My mother hovered behind him, twisting her wedding ring around her finger until the skin turned red. I stood off to the side, silent, watching the scene unfold like a play I had already read the script for. They asked for records, bank statements, property files. My brother argued, his voice rising, but the agents remained calm. One of them opened a briefcase, sliding papers across the table with quiet authority. My brother signed reluctantly, the pen clattering against the wood when he tossed it down. The room smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. Papers stacked higher, the tension thicker than the dust in the corners of the ceiling. When the agents left, my brother threw his tie onto the floor. "This is harassment," he spat. My father placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get through this. We always do. Always." That word again. But I saw it, the fear in their eyes. The cracks weren't just whispers anymore. They were right there, jagged and deep, spreading across every confident smile. That evening word spread fast. Mrs. Givens was out watering her roses, her gaze lingering on our house longer than usual. At the grocery store, I caught the cashier whispering to the bag boy, eyes flicking toward me before quickly looking away. Even at church the next day, hands that once reached for my brother's shook, instead hovered in uncertainty. The golden boy's shine was dimming and I could feel the weight shifting in the air. Inside the house it was chaos. My mother refused to cook, her appetite gone. My father sat at the kitchen table for hours, papers spread before him, muttering numbers under his breath. My brother locked himself in his room, pacing, phone glued to his ear. One night I walked past his door and paused. His voice was loud, angry. "You told me this wouldn't come back to me. I paid you. I paid everyone." I froze, heart thudding, every word searing into me. There it was, the truth, spoken not in whispers but in shouts. The next morning the courthouse was packed. Neighbors, reporters, strangers, all crowding into the wooden benches. The air smelled faintly of sweat and dust, the overhead lights buzzing as though they too were nervous. I sat near the back, hands folded in my lap, while my brother took his place at the defense table. He tried to smirk, tried to appear calm, but his hands shook as he adjusted his papers. The prosecutor stood, voice clear and sharp. Photographs appeared on the table, handshakes, contracts, bank slips. Each one louder than words. The jurors leaned forward, their expressions darkening. I watched my parents. My mother's hands clutched a handkerchief so tightly it tore. My father's jaw was set, but his eyes darted with panic. They looked smaller somehow, reduced under the weight of their own denial. My brother shifted in his chair, sweat glistening on his forehead. His lawyer whispered in his ear, but his face was pale, his confidence crumbling. The evidence stacked higher and higher, each page another stone on his chest. His empire wasn't gold, it was glass, and it was shattering before all of us. And still they looked at me. My mother turned once, her eyes pleading, as though I could fix it, as though my silence could erase years of his lies. My father shook his head slightly, a silent command to stay loyal. But I stayed still. I offered no comfort, no nod of reassurance. When the recess bell rang, the room buzzed with murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. My brother pushed his chair back hard enough to screech against the floor, storming toward the hallway. My parents followed, frantic. I rose slowly, stepping into the aisle, my steps steady. My mother turned, desperation painted across her face. "You have to help us," she whispered fiercely. "This is your family." I met her gaze, my voice quiet but sharp. "You didn't raise a family. You raised a criminal." Her face fell, the words slicing deeper than any evidence in the courtroom. The hallway smelled of floor polish and fear. Reporters swarmed, questions shouted, microphones shoved forward. My brother shielded his face with his hands, muttering curses under his breath. I stood a few feet away, silent, steady. For once, all eyes weren't on him with admiration. They were on him with suspicion. And in that moment I knew, the house of cards had fallen. Reporters still swarmed, cameras flashing, voices overlapping in the courthouse hallway. My brother shoved past them, muttering curses, his shoulders hunched, the arrogance stripped from him. My parents followed like shadows, desperate, clinging to whatever fragments of denial they had left. I stayed where I was, standing steady, hands folded in front of me, breathing slow. For once I wasn't invisible. People noticed me, the sister they had dismissed, the wife they had called useless. Neighbors, jurors, strangers, they glanced at me then back at him. The contrast was clear. The trial stretched on for weeks, each day another stone dragging him deeper. More evidence surfaced. Hidden accounts, fraudulent contracts, names of partners who suddenly vanished when subpoenas landed at their doors. Every revelation felt like confirmation of what I had known in my bones for years. He had built his life on lies. I attended every session. Sat in the same wooden bench, hands clasped, face calm. My parents sat closer to the front, their shoulders bowed lower each day, their eyes darting nervously. Sometimes my mother glanced back at me, her lips pressed thin as if silently begging for mercy. I never gave it. The whispers in town grew louder, sharper. At the grocery store, Mrs. Givens didn't greet me with questions anymore. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. At church, people avoided my parents, slipping away from pews they once crowded together. Even my husband, who had smirked at me months ago, now sat in silence during dinners, eyes fixed on his plate. He had learned too late that I wasn't the woman they thought I was. One evening, as the trial neared its end, I sat on the porch with the folder in my lap. The papers inside were worn from use, edges creased, ink fading. But they had done their job. Every line, every signature, every receipt had been a thread in the net that finally closed around him. I thought about burning it, letting the ashes scatter into the night air. But instead I slid it back into the envelope and tucked it away. Not out of fear but as a reminder. Proof of what silence and patience could accomplish. The verdict came on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was hushed, air thick with anticipation. The judge's voice was steady, each word echoing against the walls. Guilty. 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 My brother's face crumpled. The smirk that had carried him through every lie, every theft, every insult. It was gone. My mother let out a choked sob, covering her face with trembling hands. My father sat rigid, his eyes hollow, staring straight ahead. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over me. Not joy, not triumph. Something deeper. Something steadier. When the gavel struck, it wasn't just his sentence. It was the end of theirs too. The end of their illusions, their favoritism, their blind loyalty to the son they had raised at my expense. As the bailiff led him away, chains clinking against his wrists, he turned once. His eyes met mine. There was no plea, no apology. Just a flicker of recognition. He finally saw me. Not as the sister who asked for help, not as the woman dismissed at every turn. He saw the one who had ended him. Outside, the sky was overcast, heavy with clouds. People crowded the steps, murmuring, exchanging glances. I walked past them quietly, my steps even, steady. For once, no one whispered about me. They whispered about him. In the days that followed, the house grew unbearably quiet. My mother stayed in her room, curtains drawn, meals untouched. My father sat at the kitchen table with unpaid bills stacked high, the weight of debt pressing down. The Golden Boys' empire had collapsed, and with it the foundation of their pride. My husband avoided me, speaking little, his voice stripped of its former smugness. He had seen me sit in that courtroom every day, had seen me stand tall while others crumbled. He knew now I wasn't the woman he could dismiss with a smirk and a comment about being not much of a wife. One evening he muttered, "You planned this." I met his eyes across the dinner table. "No," I said quietly. "He planned it. I just let the truth speak." He didn't reply. He never brought it up again. Weeks turned into months. The town moved on as small towns do, but the memory lingered. The whispers about me faded into silence, replaced with nods of respect, cautious distance. I wasn't invisible anymore, but I wasn't approachable either. I had become something else, something untouchable. I found peace in the simplest things. Morning coffee steaming in my hands, the sound of birds in the yard, the quiet creak of the porch swing beneath me. Freedom didn't come with applause or praise. It came with silence, the kind I chose, not the kind forced on me. One afternoon I sat outside, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. My mother stepped onto the porch, her eyes swollen, her body frail. She sank into the chair beside me, hands twisting nervously in her lap. I never thought it would end this way, she whispered. I looked at her, my voice calm but firm. You never thought it would end because you never believed it could. You believed he was untouchable. You were wrong. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't comfort her. The silence between us was heavier than any words. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I realized I no longer felt the weight of their judgment, their scorn, their favoritism. It was gone, stripped away by truth. For years they had called me useless. For years I had carried the name like a chain. But now I was free. Not because they finally saw my worth, but because I no longer needed them to. The folder remained tucked away, but I didn't need to look at it anymore. It had served its purpose. My revenge wasn't the fire of anger or the sweetness of triumph. It was the steady, unshakable knowledge that I had endured, that I had waited, that I had won. As the night stretched on, I whispered into the quiet, the same way I had whispered in the beginning, "We'll see who's useless." And this time there was no doubt. As I was walking away free. If this story hit your heart the way it did mine, make sure to subscribe for more powerful revenge stories that prove underestimated women always have the last word.